Mr. Gaston was in the station alone, eating boiled peanuts at his desk, when Brother Gerald and I came through the door. Being the sort of person he was, Mr. Gaston had shells all over the floor. "Your black woman ain't here," he said, looking at me. "I took her to the hospital for stitches. She took a fall and hit her head." Took a fall, my rear end. I wanted to throw his boiled peanuts against the wall. I could not keep myself from shouting at him. "What do you mean she fell and hit her head?" Mr. Gaston looked over at Brother Gerald, that all-knowing look men give each other when a female starts to act the least bit hysterical. "Settle down now," he said to me. "I can't settle down till I know if she's all right," I said, my voice calmer but still shaking a little. "She's fine. It's only a little concussion. I expect she'll be back here later this evening. The doctor wanted her watched for a few hours." While Brother Gerald was explaining how he couldn't sign the warrant papers, seeing as how Rosaline was nearly deaf, I started for the door. Mr. Gaston shot me a warning look. "We got a guard on her at the hospital, and he's not letting anybody see her, so you go on back home. You understand?" "Yes, sir, I'm going home." "You do that," he said, "'cause if I hear you've been anywhere near that hospital, I'm calling your daddy again." Sylvan Memorial Hospital was a low brick building with one wing for whites and one for blacks. I stepped into the deserted corridor clogged with too many smells: carnations, old people, rubbing alcohol, bathroom deodorizer, red jello. Air conditioners poked out from the windows in the white section, but back here there was nothing but electric fans moving the hot air from one place to another. At the nurse's station, a policeman leaned on the desk. He looked like somebody just out of high school who'd flunked PE and hung out with the shop boys smoking at recess. He was talking to a girl in white. A nurse, I guess, since she didn't look much older than I was. "I get off at 6 o'clock," I heard him say. She stood there smiling, tucking a piece of hair behind her ear. At the opposite end of the hall, an empty chair sat outside one of the rooms. It had a policeman's hat under it. I hurried down there to find a sign on the door. "No visitors." I went right in. There were 6 beds, all empty, except the farthest one over by the window. The sheet rose up, trying hard to accommodate the occupant. I plopped my bag on the floor. "Rosaline?" A gauze bandage the size of a baby's diaper was wrapped around her head, and her wrists were tied to the bed railing. When she saw me standing there, she started to cry. In all the years she'd looked after me, I'd never seen a tear cross her face. Now the levee broke wide open. I patted her arm, her leg, her cheek, her hand. When her tear glands were finally exhausted, I said, "What happened to you?" "After you left, the policeman called Shu let those men come in for their apology." "They hit you again?" "2 of them held me by the arms while the other one hit me, one with the flashlight. He said, 'Black woman, you say you're sorry.' When I didn't, he came at me. He hit me till the policeman said that was enough. They didn't get no apology, though." I wanted those men to die in hell begging for ice water, but then I felt mad at Rosaline, too. Why couldn't you just apologize? Then maybe Franklin Posey would let you off with just a beating. All she'd done was guarantee they'd come back. "You've got to get out of here," I said, untying her wrists. "I can't just leave," she said. "I'm still in jail. If you stay here, those men are going to come back and kill you. I'm serious. They're going to kill you, like those black people in Mississippi got killed. Even T-Ray said so." When she sat up, the hospital gown rode up her thighs. She tugged it towards her knees, but it slid right back like a piece of elastic. I found her dress in the closet and handed it to her. "This is crazy," she said. "Put on the dress. Just do it, all right?" She pulled it over her head and stood there with the bandage sloped over her forehead. "That bandage has got to go," I said. I eased it off to find 2 rows of catgut stitches. Then, signaling her to be quiet, I cracked the door to see if the policeman was back at his chair. He was. Naturally, it was too much to hope he'd stay off flirting long enough for us to float out of here. I stood there a couple of minutes, trying to think up some kind of scheme, then opened my bag, dug into my peach money, and took out a couple of dimes. "I'm going to try and get rid of him. Get in the bed, in case he looks in here." She stared at me, Her eyes shrunk to mere dots. "Baby Jesus," she said. When I stepped out into the hallway, he jumped. "You weren't supposed to be in there." "Don't I know it?" I said. "I'm looking for my aunt. I could have sworn they told me room 102, but there's a black woman in there." I shook my head, trying to look confused. "You're lost, all right. You need to go to the other side of the building. You're in the black section." I smiled at him. "Oh." Oh, over on the white side of the hospital, I found a payphone next to a waiting area. I got the hospital number from information and dialed it up, asking for the nurses' station in the colored wing. I cleared my throat. "This is the jailer's wife over at the police station," I said to the girl who answered. "Mr. Gaston wants you to send the policeman that we've got over there back to the station. Tell him the preacher is on his way to sign some papers, and Mr. Gaston can't be here because he had to leave just now. So if you could tell him to get over here right away." Part of me was saying these actual words, and part of me was listening to myself say them, thinking how I belonged in a reform school or juvenile delinquent home for girls, and would probably soon be in one. She repeated it all back to me, making sure she'd had it straight. Her sigh passed over the receiver. "I'll tell him." She'll tell him. I couldn't believe it. I crept back to the black sex side and hunched over the water fountain as the girl in white relayed all this to him, using a lot of hand gestures. I watched as the policeman put on his hat and walked down the corridor and out the door. Rosaline and I stepped from her room. I looked left, then right. We had to go past the nurse's desk to get to the door, but the girl in white seemed occupied, sitting with her head down, writing something. "Walk like a visitor," I told Rosaline. Halfway to the desk, the girl stopped writing and stood up. "Shit bucket." I grabbed Rosaline's arm and pulled her into a patient's room. A tiny woman was perched in the bed, old and bird-like, with a blackberry face. Her mouth opened when she saw us, and her tongue curled out like a misplaced comma. "I need a little water," she said. Rosaline went over and poured some from a pitcher and gave the woman a glass, while I held my duffel bag at my chest and peeped out the door. I watched the girl disappear into a room a few doors down, carrying some sort of glass bottle. "Come on," I said to Rosaline. "Y'all leaving already?" said the tiny woman. "Yeah, but I'll probably be back before the day's out," said Rosaline, more for my benefit than for the woman's. This time we didn't walk like visitors. We tore out of there. Outside, I took Rosaline's hand and tugged her down the sidewalk. "Since you got everything else figured out, I guess you know where we're going," she said, and there was a tone in her voice. "We're going to Highway 40 and thumb a ride to Tiburon, South Carolina. At least we're going to try." I took us the back way, cutting through the city park, down a little alley to Lancaster Street, then 3 blocks over to May Pond Road, where we slipped into a vacant lot behind Glenn's Grocery. We waded through Queen Anne's lace and thick stalled purple flowers, into dragonflies and the smell of Carolina jasmine, so thick I could almost see it circling in the air like golden smoke. She didn't ask me why we were going to Tiburon, and I didn't tell her. What she did ask was, "When did you start saying shit bucket?" I'd never resorted to bad language, though I'd heard my share of it from T-Ray, or else read it in the public restroom. "I'm 14 now. I guess I can say it if I want to." And I wanted to, right that minute. "Shit bucket," I said. "Shit bucket, hellfire, damnation, and mother and son of a mother bitch," said Rosaline, laying into each word like it was a sweet potatoes on her tongue. We stood on the side of Highway 40 in a patch of shade provided by a faded billboard for Lucky Strike cigarettes. I stuck out my thumb while every car on the highway sped up the second they saw us. A black man driving a beat-up Chevy truck full of cantaloupes had mercy on us. I climbed in first and kept having to scoot over as Rosaline settled herself by the window. The man said he was on his way to visit his sister in Columbia, and that he was taking the cantaloupes to the state farmers market. I told him I was going to Tiburon to visit my aunt, and Rosaline was coming to do the housework for her. It sounded lame, but he accepted it. "I can drop you 3 miles from Tiburon," he said. "Sunset is the saddest light there is." We rode a long time in the glow of it, everything silent except for crickets and the frogs who were revving up for twilight. I stared through the windshield as the burned lights took over the sky. The flame flicked on the radio, and the Supremes blared through the truck cab with "Baby, Baby, Where Did Our Love Go?" There's nothing like a song about lost love to remind you how everything precious can slip from the hinges where you've hung it so carefully. I laid my head against Rosaline's arm. I wanted her to pat life back into place, but her hands lay still in her lap. 90 miles after we'd climbed in his truck, the farmer pulled off the road beside a sign that read, "Tiburon 3 miles." It pointed left, towards a road curving away into silvery darkness. Climbing out of the truck, Rosaline asked if we could have one of his cantaloupes for our supper. "Take yourself too," he said. We waited till his taillights turned to specks no bigger than lightning bugs before we spoke or even moved. I was trying not to think how sad and lost we really were. I was not sure it was an improvement over living over T-Ray, or even life in prison. There wasn't a soul anywhere to help us. But still, I felt painfully alive, like every cell in my body had a little flame inside it, burning so brightly it hurt. "At least we got a full moon," I told Rosaline. We started walking. If you think the country is quiet, you've never lived in it. Tree frogs alone make you wish for earplugs. We walked along, pretending it was a regular day. Rosaline said it looked like the farmer that had driven us there had had a good crop of cantaloupes. I said it was amazing the mosquitoes weren't out. When we came to a bridge with water running beneath, we decided we would pick our way down to the creek bed and rest for the night. It was a different universe down there, the water shining with flecks of moving light and kudzu vines draped between pine trees like giant hammocks. It reminded me of a Grimm Brothers forest, drawing up a nervous feeling I used to get when I stepped into the pages of fairy tales, where unthinkable things were likely. You just never knew. Rosaline broke open the cantaloupes, pounding them against a creek stone. We ate them down to their skins, then scooped water into our hands and drank, not caring about algae or tadpoles or whether the cows used the creek for their toilet. We sat on the bank and looked at each other. "I just want to know, of all places on this earth, why you picked Tiburon," Rosaline said. "I've never even heard of it." Even though it was dark, I pulled the Black Mary picture out of my bag and handed it to her. It belonged to my mother. On the back, it says Tiburon, South Carolina. "Let me get this straight. You picked Tiburon because your mother had a picture with the town written on the back? That's it?" "Well, think about it," I said. "She must have been there sometime in her life to have owned this picture. And if she was, a person might remember her. You never know." Rosaline held it up to the moonlight to see better. "Who's this supposed to be?" "The Virgin Mary," I said. "Well, if you ain't noticed, she's black," said Rosaline, and I could tell it was having an effect on her by the way she kept gazing at it with her mouth parted. I could read her thoughts. If Jesus' mother is black, how come we only know about the white Mary? This would be like women finding out Jesus had had a twin sister who'd gotten half God's genes, but none of the glory. She handed it back. "I guess I can go to my grave now, 'cause I've seen it all." I pushed the picture down in my pocket. "You know what T. Ray said about my mother?" I asked, wanting finally to tell her what had happened. "He said she left me and him way before she died, that she'd just come back for her things the day the accident happened." I waited for Rosaline to say how ridiculous that was, but she squinted straight ahead as if weighing the possibility. "Well, it's not true," I said, my voice rising like something had seized it from below and was shoving it up into my throat. "And if he thinks I'm going to believe that story, he has a hole in his so-called brain. He only made it up to punish me. I know he did." I could have added that mothers have instincts and hormones that prevent them from leaving their babies, that even pigs and opossums don't leave their offspring. But Rosaline, having finally pondered the matter, said, "You're probably right. Knowing your daddy, he could do a thing like that." "And my mother could never do what he said she did," I added. "I didn't know your mama." Rosaline said. But I used to see her from a distance sometimes when I came out of the orchard from picking. She'd be hanging clothes on the line or watering her plants, and you'd be right beside her, playing. I only saw her one time when you weren't under her feet. I had no idea Rosaline had ever seen my mother. I felt suddenly light-headed, not knowing if it was from hunger or tiredness or this surprising piece of news. What was she doing that time you saw her alone? I asked. She was out behind the tractor shed, sitting on the ground, staring off at nothing. When we walked by, she didn't even notice us. I remember thinking she looked a little sad. Well, who wouldn't be sad living with T-Ray? I said. I saw the light bulb snap on in Rosaline's face, then the flash of recognition. Oh, she said. I get it. You ran off 'cause what your daddy said about your mother. It didn't have nothing to do with me in jail. And here you got me worrying myself sick about you running away and getting in trouble over me, and you would have run off anyways. Well, ain't it nice of you to fill me in? She poked out her lip and looked up towards the road, making me wonder if she was about to walk back the way we came. So what are you planning to do? She said. Go from town to town asking people about your mother? Is that your bright idea? If I needed someone to criticize me around the clock, I could have brought T-Ray along, I shouted. And for your information, I don't exactly have a plan. Well, you sure had one back at the hospital, coming in there saying, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and I'm supposed to follow you along like your pet dog. You can't act like you're my keeper, like I'm some dumb black woman you're going to save. Her eyes were hard and narrow. I rose to my feet. That's not fair! Anger sucked the air from my lungs. You meant well enough, and I'm glad to be away from there, but did you think once to ask me? She said. Well, you are dumb, I yelled. You have to be dumb to pour your snuff juice on those men's shoes like that, and then dumber not to say you're sorry if saying it will save your life. They were going to come back and kill you, or worse. I got you out of there, and this is how you thank me? Well, fine. I stripped off my keds, grabbed my bag, and waded into the creek. The coldness cut sharp circles around my calves. I didn't want to be on the same planet with her, much less the same side of the creek. You find your own way from now on, I yelled over my shoulder. On the opposite side, I plopped into the mossy dirt. We stared across the water at each other. In the dark, she looked like a boulder shaped by 500 years of storm. I lay back and closed my eyes. In my dream, I was back on the peach farm, sitting out behind the tractor shed. Even though it was broad daylight, I could see a huge round moon in the sky. It looked so perfect up there. I gazed at it a while, then leaned against the shed and closed my eyes. Next, I heard a sound like ice breaking, and looking up, I saw the moon crack apart and start to fall. I had to run for my life. I woke with my chest hurting. I searched for the moon and found it all in one piece, still spilling light over the creek. I looked across the water for Rosaline. She was gone. My heart did flip-flops. Please, God, I didn't mean to treat her like a pet dog. I was trying to save her. That's all. Fumbling to get my shoes on, I felt the same old grief I'd known in church every single Mother's Day. Mother, forgive. Rosaline, where are you? I gathered up my bag and ran along the creek toward the bridge, hardly aware I was crying. Tripping over a dead limb, I sprawled through the darkness and didn't bother to get up. I could picture Rosaline miles from here, tearing down the highway, mumbling, "Shit bucket, damn fool girl." Looking up, I noticed that I'd fallen beneath what the tree that I'd fallen beneath was practically bald, only little bits of green here and there, and lots of gray moss dangling to the ground. Even in the dark, I could see that it was dying, doing it alone in the middle of all these unconcerned pines. That was the absolute way of things. Loss takes up inside everything sooner or later and eats right through it. Humming drifted out of the night. It wasn't a gospel tune exactly, but it carried all the personality of one. I followed the sound and found Rosaline in the middle of the creek, not a stitch of clothes on her body. Water beaded across her shoulders, shining like drops of milk, and her breast swayed in the current. It was the kind of vision you never really get over. I couldn't help it. I wanted to go and lick the milk beads from her shoulders. I opened my mouth. I wanted something. Something. I didn't know what. Mother, forgive. That's all I could feel. That old longing spread under me like a great lap, holding me tight. Off came my shoes, my shorts, my top. I hesitated with my underpants, then worked them off too. The water felt like a glacier melting against my legs. I must have gasped at the iciness, because Rosaline looked up and seeing me come naked through the water, started to laugh. "Look at you strutting out here, jiggle tit and all." I eased down beside her, suspending my breath at the water's sting. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know," she said. "Me too." She reached over and patted the roundness of my knee like it was biscuit dough. Thanks to the moon, I could see clear down to the creek bottom, all the way to the carpet of pebbles. I picked one up, reddish, round, a smooth water heart. I popped it into my mouth, sucking for whatever marrow was inside it. Leaning back on my elbows, I slid down till the water sealed over my head. I held my breath and listened to the scratch of river against my ears, sinking as far as I could into that shimmering dark world. But I was thinking about a suitcase on the floor, about a face I could never quite see, about the sweet smell of cold cream.